Hi, everybody. This is Matt Harrington with the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce. You're joining us on Friday, April 17th, amid the COVID crisis. We're trying to do at least one of these every week, if not twice a week, if the information is out and we want to share it with you. We have to give a big thank you to our continuing partners, Cat TV. We want to thank them for broadcasting live on Facebook as well as on their channels, and it will be recorded as well for later viewing. If you are tuning in live to Facebook, what's great about this platform is if you have questions for my guest today, we want you to comment in the Facebook live feed, and I will read them if we have time for our special guest. And let's get to our special guest today. Joining me, Senator Brian Campion of Bennington County, Senator Dick Sears of Bennington County, and what we found out a couple days ago is Congressman Peter Welch is joining us as well, which is terrific. I think it's a great opportunity. Congressman Welch has obviously had a lot of focus in Bennington over the last couple of years with the Putnam. We were just talking about that, Congressman, and the impact of COVID on that. Why don't we get right into it? I know the congressman has limited time, so we're going to have him for the first 15 minutes of the show, and then we will kind of pivot over to Senator Campion and Senator Sears for more statewide legislation that's happening. So, Congressman Welch, this just came out I think a day ago. You and 4 other members of Congress plan to introduce legislation this week called the Reopen America Act. That would help states to keep infection rates under control as they open the economies. Governor Scott is speaking live right now about starting the Reopen Vermont. What are some of the elements of that legislation? What have you been working on over the last week?
Well, first of all, let me put it in a context. So much has happened so quickly. Everything has been turned upside down. Companies that had 240 workers on Monday, on Tuesday had 4. And just think about that as one example. 236 people who thought they were going to work weren't going to work, and they didn't have a paycheck to cover their bills. The governor is doing a really good job on the social distancing, but the collateral consequence is that we're turning off the lights on the economy. And obviously, we've got to focus on our health first, but we've got to eventually come back to getting our economy going. And what we know, number one, this is the first time in 100 years our country has faced a pandemic. It was after the First World War, 1918, that we had the Spanish flu. And we lost more lives as a result of that than we did in the horrors of the First World War. So as disruptive as it is, and we're only like a month into this or 2 months into it, this is no playbook for the governor, for Senators Campion and Sears, for folks who are running businesses. But there are things we do know. Number one, we've got to deal with the health and safety of people first. In social distancing, everyone acknowledges that's not a partisan deal, is required. Number two, the collateral consequence of that is it really has a brutal economic impact. Number three, the federal government is the only governmental entity that has the fiscal capacity to try to step up and help our states, help our hospitals, help our communities. So we've done this $2.2 trillion CARES package, and we can talk about that. It's helping, but there's gaps, and we're starting to identify those. But you asked the question about getting back the Reopen America Act. We've got to reopen, but in order to do that, here's what has to happen. Number one, we've got to bend the curve. And the governor's actions here, and I think people around the country, we're starting to see some progress there. Why? Because we have to have hospital capacity to treat people who get sick from COVID, and also hospital capacity to treat people who get sick for other reasons. But number two, that just puts us in a position to manage the healthcare crisis. There's 2 other things that we have to do, and this is what is the focus of our legislation. One, we've got to test. Number 2, we have to do contact tracing, where we have to find out, and this is what Singapore did and South Korea did. In Wuhan, they had 1,800 teams of 5 people who, if I got tested positive, they'd ask me, who did I see? those folks would be tested, and you'd be able then to identify hotspots and then next quarantine folks who are infected or tested positive. That way, you're containing the virus and you're allowing for much more normal activity in our economy, perhaps with masks, with social distancing. Our Reopen America acknowledges that the federal government has to do the major role in making certain the medical equipment and the testing equipment is available. Number two, it's got to bear the cost of having a public health apparatus of teams that are going to do the contact tracing. And number three, it has to finance what's required of quarantining so that it doesn't become a burden on the state. And so that if I'm about to get tested, and I think that if I get tested positive, I won't be able to put bread on the table for my family, I might say no to the test. We've got to provide a stipend to folks who are going into quarantine because they're doing something that's not just good for them, it's good for the public health. So that's the approach here.
Thanks, Congressman. And you have done a lot of work. We passed the stimulus package for Vermont to the tune of $2 billion. And as a thank you, I think, from all Vermonters, for you, Senator Leahy, and Senator Sanders for doing that. What does the size of that even mean for Vermont? And I think we're probably already starting to see where that isn't even enough to continue some of the efforts going on. But what does $2 billion mean to Vermonters?
Well, it's more than that, actually. You know, the payroll protection plan is helping a lot of businesses, and it's not helping as many as need help. But so far, we've had well over 4,000 applications approved, and it's about well over $800 million into the Vermont economy that will allow businesses to continue paying their folks. Second, the unemployment benefits are really significant. You know, we're having challenges with an ancient computer system, and you know we're not scaled up to do it. Your brother's doing, I think, a really good job. And they're working on trying to get that out. Bottom line, if you're unemployed, you're eligible to get whatever you're entitled to under Vermont law. But in addition to that, $600 a week from the federal government. That's part of CARE. So that'll help folks pay their bills. And I know the governor and your brother are working really, really hard to try to get those checks out. So that'll help. But the other aid that's so significant is that Senator Sears and Senator Campion are going to be contending with incredible pressures on the Vermont budget. We've got to get money back to the state that helps them so that when they're making these tough decisions, it's not about just cutting access to healthcare in the Medicaid program. It's not about cutting the educational contribution that the state makes to the Bennington School District. All right, so this aid to the states is not, quote, the state. It's really people. It's kids who need health care. It's kids who need an education. It's firefighters who need support. It's municipal budgets that want to keep their police on the beat. So that's vital. And right now we're having a bit of a contention in Washington about the next CARES Act. Senator McConnell is okay with the PPP, more money in it, and so am I. So is Nancy Pelosi. But we also think we've got to help our hospitals that have faced a revenue collapse and increase in some demand. And we've got to help Dick and Brian so that when they're making decisions for us here in Vermont, it's not all cut, healthcare for kids, education for kids.
Yeah. Senator Campion, Senator Sears, you want to weigh in on that just in terms of, you know, the magnitude of issues and challenges within that budget for Vermont, and how do we plan to remedy that?
Sure. I mean, I can just jump in quickly and say, first of all, thank you, Congressman Welch, for being with us. Thank you, Matt, for organizing it. It's, I mean, Sears is on appropriations. I serve on finance. We had a finance meeting yesterday that was starting to look at monies coming in, and as well as revenue deficits that we can be anticipating, particularly around funding our schools. And it's a big issue. It's a huge issue. And this is not going to be the time where we consider any kind of real property tax increases. People are strapped. Right. And so how do we fill these holes? And we certainly are going to be looking to the federal government to help us as much as possible. I also just want to say how much it seems to me that people in Vermont are taking advantage of these PPPs. And I know that funds have dried up on the first round, but we're encouraging people to go forward, put in their applications now, because it sounds like a second round of funds is indeed coming, which I think really could, keep people at their jobs, bring people back, to work, and give a little bit of a break to the unemployment rolls.
I think that's really good advice, Brian, and I'm hopeful we will get more money. It's broadly supported, the PPP, so that's good advice.
I really want to thank Congressman Welch, Senator Leahy, Senator Sanders for their remarkable work they've done. I don't think many people realize there's a small state minimum. And that's
Right.
why we're getting a lot of the money that we're getting. And without that small state minimum, we'd be getting a lot less. And they worked hard to make sure that was a part of the bill. And it may be just a detail that's lost, but it's probably $1 billion detail.
Yeah.
So that's important. I think the other, we're just beginning to see the impact in just this quarter of the fiscal year of about $200 million across all funds in Vermont. That's just what we're not taking in. So as people say, well, we need this, we need that, without the federal stimulus package, without the federal CARES Act, we just can't do it. And those are tough decisions. We actually have a meeting at 1:00 of the Appropriations Committee to talk about hazard pay, where folks who are on the front lines
Right.
that are not able to have a union to protect them. This is from the grocery store clerk to the janitor at the high school, all these people who are doing some
Right.
amazing work. And we feel they need to be recognized and they need the money. So that's one thing that's coming up quickly, and I know the congressman has that as part of a bill.
Right, I
Thank you.
do. And no,
ahead.
I think you're right. I mean, our first responders are folks in the grocery stores. It's really true. They're being, told that they are essential. We got it shot. And all of us are being told, stay home. They're being told to go out. And they're doing it. And they're doing it because we need them to. So the hazard pay, I think some recognition to them is absolutely essential. I agree.
If you're just joining us, we want to thank Cat TV for broadcasting this live. This will also be recorded. But if you are watching on Facebook Live, please ask questions of both or all of the special guests today: Congressman Welch, Senator Campion, Senator Sears. I know Congressman has to go soon, so we will stay on with Senator Campion and Sears. But I'm going to try and wrap up a couple different questions I had for you, Congressman, as we've used our time up already, and it's been great. But the SBA, Brian, I think you alluded to this, that there are kind of this initial wave of funding has dried up. I think it sent, an immediate panic through the business community. But, I think there's an idea that there will be, a stimulus 2, perhaps even a stimulus 3. So talk to a little bit to our business owners who are, we're filing for the PPP, wanting to keep staff, and just got notified, yesterday that there's no funding there. We're applying for the EIDL loan and got notified there's no funding there. But also, Congressman, you talked about that, hey, we're going back to the Hill and we're going to work on some more funding. So what does that look like?
I think it looks promising. I mean, here's the deal. Every congressional district is having the same conversation that we're having right now. And this virus and the impact it's had on the economy is not a red state, blue state deal. It's the invisible enemy that is having an impact that's very visible on our economy. So there's a lot of support for the PPP across party lines. It was agreed to by Pelosi and it was agreed to by McConnell. All right, when's that happen? Right now, where there's a difference and people get upset about the politics of it, but it's actually really, really important. There's two other areas where we've had a consensus between Republicans and Democrats, and that is we've got to help our hospitals. And, in rural America, that's really important. We can't let them go out of business. because there's going to be, they're important to our economy and our well-being. And then secondly, it's that state aid, and that's the sticking point. Senator McConnell just isn't as excited about that as I think a lot of his Republican and Democratic colleagues are. And it's like talking about is the state as the abstraction. But again, Brian and Dick know it's like kids in Bennington who will they have access to health care through Medicaid? It's kids in Bennington who will we be cutting education or trying to raise property taxes at a time when it's obviously the wrong time to do that. So we want to keep those three elements together because they're so important and they really are a consensus approach. And in our conference call with the caucus yesterday, the speaker was somewhat optimistic about progress being made in these negotiations. So I think Brian's advice to businesses, do the paperwork, get your application in there, that the likelihood is there'll be more money in the PPP program. I think that's good advice, and I think that'll happen.
Great, great. Well, I know you have to run, Congressman, but we like to end with every one of our guests when we start to do these COVID updates with, what are you doing to relieve stress? You got a great background there. I'm hoping you're at your home. What do you do, and what can you encourage other people that are, trying to handle this social distancing thing?
Well, first of all, you asked. It's nice of you to ask me what I do, but I'm lucky. I mean, it's Margaret and I. We live on a dirt road. She's working on Zoom calls, and I'm working on Zoom calls. But we don't have the challenge of doing home education for our kids.
Yep.
The folks who are doing that and also trying to figure out paycheck to paycheck life when they don't have that regular work. I mean, that's really, really, really hard. And my hat is off to them. What we're doing is we have our 3 meals together. We've never spent so much time together. It's working out so far.
Good to know.
Yeah.
That's great.
And what I'm doing, I get exercise, but I live in the woods, so I went off. I go off like for 2-hour walks in the woods, and so far I haven't gotten lost. And then liquor. I noticed that liquor sales are up. And we do have a cocktail around news.
Are you helping that curve? It sounds like you're helping that curve.
I've made a contribution, but it's more exercise than alcohol at this point.
That's good. Good.
I saw her splitting wood, by the way.
Yeah, Congressman Peter Welch, thank you so much for joining us today. Stick around for the Senator Campion and Senator Sears are going to remain. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Dick. And Brian, thank you so much for your wonderful, wonderful work for Vermont.
Thank you.
All right, so let's tend to focus a little bit more inwardly into the Vermont economy, the Vermont relief. Can you, and I'll throw this out to either you, Senator Sears, or Senator Campion, where are we currently at? There's been a lot of news over even the last 48 hours, and I hope to get to some of those questions, kind of more pointed questions. But where do you feel like we're at this Friday?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to thank everybody in Bennington County. We've kept the numbers very low down here. And I think that's through a tremendous sacrifice of a lot of people who have, followed social distancing and et cetera. So that is kudos to them. But this is such a dangerous disease that we have to be extremely careful as we reopen. But I believe we're going to know more today from the governor's press conference. I believe they're going to start with farmers markets. It's going to be very slow and other things. And people really want to get back to work. And for me, one of the most frustrating things is not being able to turn a spigot on for people to either get their unemployment insurance or to get these loans. Both Brian and I are being deluged with emails and asked for help. And as legislators, we basically make the policy, the administration implements that policy. And I know that people at the Department of Labor are working 24/7 trying to solve these problems. And this is true across the nation. But the frustration that people are feeling not being able to get their checks, not being able to get through on the lines. That frustration, you asked the congressman about what he's doing to relieve the stress. One of the things we know is the immune system, it's broken down when you're having stress. And so it's important that we do what we can to relieve some of that stress. And yet here are some people, we've heard from people redialing 400 times in a day. And that's not the odd one, just trying to get through to a human being. And my heart goes out to them. I wish I could wave a magic wand and fix that. We've also heard from people who, are chomping at the bit to get back to work. And we're trying to release that valve slowly in Vermont. I think the governor's done a tremendous job in doing that. And I know when it's over, people will say, well, it could have been done this way, it could have been that way. But keeping the death rate as low as possible is a key, and is not having our hospitals in an overflow situation.
Great. Senator Campion?
Yeah, I think Dick has pointed out some of the concerns that we have. One of the things that I'm interested in, I know you and people like John Shanahan and others have probably had this conversation, is how unique Vermont might be when it is time to reopen. I mean, we are a rural state. There is possibility, perhaps greater possibility of continuing social distancing. So those kinds of conversations, I think, are really interesting ones for us as a community to lead on. Again, as things start to reopen, people go back to their golf courses, people want to hike, people want to be in the fresh air. There are also some rules and regulations that we're all going to have to follow. And I was talking to the museum director yesterday. He was reminding me when China reopened, there was a real huge crowds at all these historic sites, all of their museums. So how can we manage? How can we get ahead of that? Also, I think is both a positive and a challenge. It's a positive in that I do think the state of Vermont is uniquely positioned to reopen in a way that I think will attract a lot of different kinds of people back here to be outdoors, to enjoy everything Vermont offers. At the same time, how do we put in some rules and regulations that are smart, that'll keep people healthy?
Yeah, and I want to circle back to Senator Sears. We were talking about the Department of Labor, and obviously that's one of the real kind of linchpins of some of the businesses here and some of the struggles they've had. In the Bennington Banner today, you were quoted just asking, of that Department of Labor, we have some expectations. Can you kind of outline what are some of the recent measures you and the legislature have been asking of the Department of Labor, and/or what are some things that you see on the horizon that might be rolling out from the Department of Labor that will alleviate some of those wait times?
Well, it may be as necessary as just having more people answering these phones so that people can get through on the first or second redial and not have to do 1,000 times. It may be as simple as, we're pretty much, when I use the term ancient, I was around before the internet. So, but many of our systems are extremely old. And those systems aren't capable of some of this. And so it may be needing to enter the information manually and getting the checks out to people. If we make a mistake, we make a mistake, but let's just get the money out to people. And that's the most important thing right now. A lot of Vermonters living paycheck to paycheck. They can't support the local businesses because they don't have the money to do it. They don't have the money to pay their rent. When they don't have the money to pay their rent, the landlord is hurting. So it has a tumbling impact on the economy. So I think that's job number one. The Joint Fiscal Committee is meeting again Monday. We basically said, put all the resources you need into getting this fixed and getting it fixed as quickly as possible. The last time we had a situation like this was at the sign up for that Vermont Health Connect, if you remember back when those systems we all thought those systems were going to work. And, they crashed. And that's what's happening now. And when you only had, I think, and I hope I'm right, about 75 employees with the Department of Labor working 24/7 trying to answer all these questions. When you had this incredible Zoom in the number of people who are filing for unemployment, obviously 75 was not enough, and we need to get more resources in there, and we need to do it as soon as possible.
Great. For those that are watching live on Facebook, please be asking your questions. We've got a question here, and we've got a couple questions here, and I want to preface them by saying I'm not sure anyone on the call is an expert. We did have Wendy Morse a couple weeks ago of the Department of Labor on, and we will have next week we'll be working some HR into one of these telecasts. But maybe either Senator Campion or Senator Sears can answer this. Our PPP closing is next week. Next Friday would be the first payday when we should be rehiring employees. With the current additional 600 unemployment benefit, some of our employees have expressed concern that they would be doing better to remain unemployed. And we've heard this, I know, even at the chamber and with many of our businesses, that it's actually more lucrative for people not to work. And even for some of those, I think of some of the restaurants that have been really having to come back online now that they've been doing takeout and stuff. Their people aren't coming back because of being paid too well on unemployment. What's the future of that? And does that
I can add to that, and Dick may have more, is some of these are federal policies. That, for example, is a federal policy, the additional $600. But I do see what people's concern is. I do also think there are people out there that really do want to go back to work. I mean, they're ready to go back to work. I think most people are ready to go back to work. And so the health that is, we were talking earlier about how do we sustain ourselves during these difficult times. One of them I do believe is going back to work, trying to reconnect with people, even if it's on calls like these. Sitting at home, as Congressman Welch said, it's great to reconnect with our spouses and partners and do some work from home. But really, I think for a lot of people, if given the opportunity, they want to get back and contribute and back to a normal way of life.
I'm no expert on this, but I think that if you are either COVID positive or you're helping, teach your kids, they're homeschooled right now, then you would continue to get the $600. One of the unintended consequences of the $600 was what you just spoke of, is people may be doing just as well to not work. And that was the reason at 1:00 today, I've got a meeting of the Appropriations Committee to discuss how we can get hazard pay to folks who are working so that at least they get a bonus. So we say to them, hey, thank you for working at the grocery store. We're going to provide this extra for you out of the CARES fund because you're doing the work. You could have been home and maybe making just a little bit more by working. So that was one of the things we're trying to do. I know that with the union of the Vermont State Employees Association is receiving an extra $1.50 an hour for those frontline workers, like in a correctional facility, for example. And those who are working with COVID-19 populations, like those at the St. Johnsbury Correctional Facility, are getting almost double pay for taking on that type of challenge. So there are ways to incentivize people to work. But there will be unintended consequences. Each individual situation that, needs to be dealt with individually. And that's part of the frustration of trying to have a blanket rule for everyone.
Sure.
Matt, would you mind, if you're willing, would you put perhaps share our legislative email addresses if you can? Yep. Some of these questions that might come in, one of the things one of the advantages of working from home and sometimes being able to carve out a little bit more time here and there is working to answer all these questions.
Sure.
So please, if to the audience, if anybody has any specific questions, feel free to email one or both of us, and we'll do our very best to get you an answer quickly.
Just as we were going live, I believe I saw a little snippet that Governor Scott will be turning on a little bit of the economy, and I didn't get a time frame on it. But with that in mind, we've seen a lot in the last couple of days about the right way to roll out kind of the economy, and I think with that, health and safety and all the things that get a little bit back to normal. Do you, either Senator Sears or Senator Campion, have any kind of thought around what would, or have inside knowledge around what kind of gets rolled out first and how do we do it and the complexity behind it?
I think it has to do with distance in part. I mean, Dick can weigh in on this, of course, also. But I received a call this morning. The Old First Church needs a paint job. It's overdue, and because of cost, they rotate what side they paint on, and they weren't able to paint it last year because of weather. But is there a possibility to get somebody over here this year, get somebody to paint it this year? To me, that strikes me as something that should be part of that conversation. Landscapers, part of that conversation. Those folks that can, keep a safe distance from one another. That's the group. I also think I applaud the governor. It sounds like, I haven't heard officially, but that he has opened farmers markets, probably with certain guidance. I think the governor has done a really great job around giving people good guidance. His health department in particular, I applaud for really not only trying to keep a few things going, but also being flexible. You look at the cocktail thing that our downtown restaurants are able to benefit from. Those kinds of things, that kind of flexibility, while also keeping people safe, I think has been great. So for me, it's what kinds of things where people can stay safely away from one another, and it's the landscaping, it's the painting, it's perhaps house repair, things like that jump out.
I'll say this for Senator Sears: is golf within the bounds of, or soon to be?
Could be.
Well, we need Sears to get back out there and practice.
Well,
I don't want to see Portland beat him this year.
Right, it's part of it should be part of it. But it's a good example of those of us who are living in the border communities. So if Massachusetts or New York doesn't allow it, and we allow golf, will a bunch of people from Mass and New York start coming over to Vermont to play, and all the problems that would be associated with that? So I think there's a lot of those considerations, but I think anything that you can safely be distant in, particularly landscaping, painting, things that Brian just talked about, should be the first ones. It's hard to see a production line, for example, where people have to be side by side to move in manufacturing. It's hard to see classrooms full of kids coming back quickly, where you have even 20 or 30 kids in a classroom or whatever the number is. I've been thinking a lot about how would the legislature's committees meet. Our rooms are incredibly small. You couldn't get 6 feet and have 5 people in those rooms.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of things like that we're going to have to deal with until we have a vaccine, and that's where I think until that happens, we don't see a real return to normal.
I've asked this on other telecasts, and I think it'd be good for both of you, as I think you went through some of these crises. I'll probably stop asking how do they compare, because I think this is the most challenging we've seen in our generation. But how does this compare to other Vermont disasters? And I'm thinking everything from 9/11 to the 2008 recession to really Hurricane Irene, which really mobilized a lot of our legislature, as well as private and public partnerships. What were lessons learned from those times, and do you see that we have better acumen to that now? Do we move faster because of it, or are we still learning some things not unlike the Department of Labor?
I think for me, it's the broadest devastation. One very similar theme through all of them. for me, and I think Dick would agree, has been the various administrations and how well they did responding. You look at how Peter Shumlin was exceptional during his response and his administration's team to Hurricane Irene. Both governors were exceptional with regard to their immediate response to PFOA in Bennington and getting people hooked up in their advocacy for the people down here. And here also we're seeing an administration that has responded very effectively to this crisis, and in my opinion has, because of the policies they've taken and implemented, they've saved lives. So that's a common theme, and I'm grateful for that. And then for me, it's how incredibly broad of an impact and hit this has had. Certain towns were not hit seriously by Irene. Of course, there was massive devastation in certain communities, but for me, this has really crossed every mountain, every valley in the state.
You know that. Great. Maybe to answer your question, I think Brian hit on it. It wasn't in every town. I can remember calling Peter Shumlin that Sunday afternoon when the river I was over in North Bennington by the North Bennington Firehouse and saying how bad it was over there. We're about to flood here, not having any idea what the rest of the state was like. And when I got Shumlin on the phone, he said, "You have any idea what I'm dealing with here?" And when I finally got over to Wilmington to see what had happened there, when I got over to other communities, this has been a statewide hit, and it's much different in that respect. But as Brian alluded to, it's certainly the response of government. It's a time when you need government, and you need government to be able to respond. And I feel badly that there have been parts of our government that have not responded as well as other parts have. And that's part of the frustration.
Great. Well, I appreciate that answer. Let's, Brian, you had been in the past on the education committee, so let's pivot there a little bit. I think there's a lot of concern about, I think personally, the idea that you have to teach 4 of your kids at home right now while trying to do work. What's the future of education in Vermont? What, especially with I think there's been some advances in telemedicine and teleeducation, which are perhaps exciting. Necessity breeds innovation, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of stress on the school system. Have you heard anything, or as we look at funding for hospitals, are there additional funds for those institutions that are going to need support?
It's a great question. One of I think I just bring up 2 things. One of the things that I'm feeling a little optimistic about, that I'm really hopeful for, is that with these federal dollars coming in, our communication union districts that have been formed around the state, we have one here in Bennington County, will receive the necessary funds to expand broadband. I think we've seen the inequity emphasized during this crisis, where some families have access to broadband, to good solid internet, others don't. Some have absolutely nothing. So I'm hopeful that with this influx, we can really say, all right, business as usual, filling these little holes here and there is over, and we can actually start to extend fiber to everywhere throughout the state, because it really is, it's a money issue. And this might be an opportunity for us to address that. And that would certainly improve some of the inequities that we're seeing in education. The other thing I'm hearing, Matt, is that special education in particular is difficult at this time. And some special education teachers are really struggling. And I know the Senate Education Committee is starting to look at that issue. And then finally, in terms of how to help those families and those teachers, the impact on higher education. As Senator Sears mentioned earlier in the call, 3 of our state colleges it's being recommended that they close: Johnson, Linden, and Randolph. So what does that mean for those communities? I mean, we still have an institution of higher education in Bennington, Middlebury also. How do we work with those institutions, work with our hospitals, work with other areas that might be somewhat vulnerable during these times to help support them? I mean, as we all know, these are not only first and foremost places where young people go to be educated. Secondly, these are economic drivers in all of our communities.
I want to add a little bit to that. Brian's spot on, but I think that many of our institutions, including education, probably parents are greater appreciation for what teachers go through on a day-to-day basis, having their 2 or 3 kids trying to homeschool. But I expect a huge surge. And how will hospitals be able to handle that surge as all of our elective procedures, even some of my routine appointments have been canceled? And all of a sudden, people are going to say, well, I need this taken care of. I need that. There's going to be that surge. Our courts are going to get a surge, believe it or not.
After, once we start to release.
We start to release, you're going to see this tremendous surge, and our institutions and our infrastructure there to do it. But back to one of your questions about what should be done. This is a great time to begin paving our roads and improving our infrastructure. Not only will it put a lot of people back to work, but it would also be a time when there's not as much traffic, particularly tourist traffic that we often hold up during the foliage season. So those types of activities would really be a positive.
I like where you're going with that, Senator Sears, and there was a recent article. There's been a recent, column coverage in the New York Times by Thomas Friedman. He's been writing for the New York Times forever, it seems like. But really around where does America go from here? I know his last article was on energy, and it's in the same line that you're saying. So we kind of have a little bit of this blank canvas to really build out the next generation of Vermont. And so with that in mind, where do both you and Senator Campion see one, I think there's the short term, let's pave our roads. And then there's some of that long term, which is let's build, Wi-Fi and internet for every household. So where do you see Vermont in the next 5 to 10 years? Let's do a little magic wanding here and say, look, all things, if we get over this and we have good economic recovery and we have relief funds coming in, where do we put those relief funds?
I think into people first, and improving our infrastructure, improving our businesses. As we sat here today, I was losing broadband, and so some of you, when you were talking, I could see you, but your mouths weren't moving. I could hear you. So certainly internet, broadband, all of those things that can help make us. I think the other thing we'll have, and it was somewhat of an advantage after 9/11, people from the cities said, maybe I should move to Vermont and work through telecommuting. I can get to New York City in 3.5 hours from Bennington, or I can get to Boston within 3 hours from Bennington. Maybe that's a great place to go. I think we can make that happen by working on all of our infrastructure. So those are some of the things that I see that we can take advantage of this situation. Maybe we should be looking forward to those types of things.
Yeah, Dick brings up great points. I think this is, again, an opportunity possibly, as you alluded to, Matt, to stop business as usual in terms of filling just little holes in our systems, but to rethink renewable energy, rethink how we use our roads, think about public transportation, think about extending fiber. I do applaud, as Senator Sears mentioned earlier, our congressional delegation for getting the dollars that they actually were able to get us. I think when one day when some of us were just doing a back of the envelope, we were thinking, you could see upwards to $1 billion, but for us to have exceeded $2 billion is terrific, and hopefully additional dollars will come that will help us as we move forward.
Great. Well, as we kind of come to a close here on this telecast, I'll pose the same question as I did to Congressman Welch, who was on earlier, and we want to thank Congressman Welch for joining us earlier, as well as Senator Campion, Senator Sears of Bennington. But Brian and Dick, what are some things that you're doing right now that are stress relieving And I think the congressman opened the door because he said he's going to the liquor store. So I think everything's on the
We
table.
could say anything now, right?
Yeah, right. But what are you doing? And
Well,
what would you
I went to the
recommend
liquor
people?
store, when the shutdown was early and stocked up a little bit, but
Good,
no,
good.
in seriousness,
Forethought.
what I've been doing is trying to exercise every day, trying to get outside, even if it's just to sit outside and spend a few hours. I did get the chance to play golf over at Hoosick Falls before they closed that, and I have had a chance to do some walking with the dog. We're spending a lot more time grooming the dog than we ever have before, so he's looking great. And we're spending a lot more time. I'm trying not to watch too much television of the COVID-19. It seems like we already know a lot, and trying to watch some variety and kind of having a few laughs.
Great. Thanks. Senator Campion?
Very similar, trying to get outside as much as possible, going for walks and runs. Many people know I'm a cold water swimmer, and there's a pond behind the house. And so I was in that yesterday. Try to get in that as much as possible just for a quick dip. Wakes me up in the morning. I would say that's about it. I try to, and I know Senator Sears does, we're all trying as much as possible, which is a wonderful treat to go down to our local businesses and support them as much as possible. Getting maybe a special takeout, special cocktail, bouquet of flowers, order a book. I know the Easter candy has I'm sure there were a lot of purchases, but still there's never
Mother's Day is coming up.
More candy. So
yeah, Mother's Day. So
Mother's Day, absolutely. Any days we'll celebrate.
Any day.
So it's that also for us has been a nice special thing to just go and get takeout, get a couple cocktails, and hang out outside.
Yes. Well, I would be remiss if I let you go and I didn't mention how thankful we are, and I know the business community. And if you don't know, both Senator Sears and Senator Campion have been working around the clock. And I can think of just a couple things off the top of my head: the farmers market, the difference between Walmart and downtown. A lot of things that you guys have definitely been earning your keep, and we are very fortunate. What I continually hear throughout the state is that Bennington is at the table, and that Southwestern Vermont is really kind of leading in terms of just being at the table and rolling up sleeves and trying to figure this all out. So on behalf of the business community and half of all Southwestern Vermont, I want to thank both Brian Campion and Dick Sears for joining me today and all the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you, Matt.
Great. Well, if you're just tuning in, you can watch this as a recording. We hope you caught the beginning with Congressman Peter Welch. We want to thank the Congressman for joining us today. And then the back half was with Senator Sears and Senator Campion of Bennington. I want to thank Cat TV and their staff. They have been incredible. Every time we want to do one of these, they have been working with us to do this. We are looking forward to next week. We're hoping to answer some more of those HR and unemployment questions. So I saw a couple of those come up in the Facebook feed this time. So we will try and ask those questions next week on Friday at noon again. And on behalf of the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce, I want to thank you for tuning in today and have a great weekend.
Thank you.